Hi, it's the 19th of November 2019. You're very welcome back. The weather's turned seasonal, cold, but dry today. We're going to have a look at a feature of the North-South Interconnector, and that is undergrounding the cables. Now, there was surprisingly little information on undergrounding until about 2012, and that coincided with the planning permission for the North-South Interconnector, also known as the pylons. And indeed, I don't see many books on electrical engineering actually dealing with it too well, but I've got a few sources anyway. So this takes a look at the methods of bringing 400 kV, 400,000 volts, a distance of some, I think it's 104 kilometers, something like that. But it's long distance anyway. In generally, it's long distance. The vast majority of cables are overground, of course. And so there's that little thing there, and little clips here, North-South Interconnector. Okay. So there's no mathematics on this. You'll be glad to hear. You'll know what a pylon looks like. Not a great bit of art, but that's generally a cross section of a pylon carrying cables. And the important thing to note about it is that there's generally, if you look at the big ones, 6 cables and one up here at the top. The top one is generally a communications cable. Now, you'll see the 6 here on each side. Now, the funny thing is, the way they do it is, there's 3 lines needed, 3 cables, for an alternating current, high voltage, 3-phase system. And if you look at it, there's 6 cables. And in the majority of cases, there's a duplicate system. So one side is what's running at any one time. The other side is actually a spare. So they can switch it back and forward to replace cables as they're required. That's a cross section of the cables. Okay? You have 3 down here. 3 down here. The one at the top is a communications. Okay? And there's a spare. And it's air cooled, and the insulating material in this is open space, and on earth that's with air, which is roughly 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. Okay, so the air forms a coolant. And it's easy accessed. One of the things about alternating current, and I have a series of 3 videos in the original Val Martin Ireland YouTube. They're very good, they're practical videos, is skinning. And essentially, if you could imagine you're pumping water through a pipe, or you're pulling a ship with a chain, the force applied at one end doesn't want to get out to the other end. So if you pump water here through an inch pipe 500 yards away, it'll try and get out. If there's a hole in the pipe, it'll try and escape. Same with electricity, it's always trying to escape doing the work it's been made to do. In the same way, if you're pulling a car with a light rope, the rope may break because it's trying to avoid doing the work. So the connections are always trying to avoid doing the work. And they do this with resistance, capacitance and inductance. There are technical terms, we're not going into them here too much. So this skinning thing is got over by placing 2 cables together, like this, carrying the same current. They're the very same current. I'll just put them like this. And then they put a clasp across, something like this, bolted them down. And the skinning effect tends to push the current out towards the outside, out towards the end. You can get it on your search engine there. And by having 2 separate cables, you minimize that effect. So there's other ways of twisting the wire around, and there's all types of things, but in any event, just it has to be borne in mind. The best conductive material at ordinary cost is copper. Copper is very conductive, or is it conducive? Doesn't matter anyway. It's good at carrying electricity. Aluminium is pretty good, and it has the advantage of being light. Copper tends to be a little bit heavy. Steel is good, but it's very heavy. It's very heavy. It's strong and it's springy, and it won't work hard in the same way in cables, but it's not as good at carrying the current as copper and aluminium. So we're then looking at undergrounding. So we see that if you can get away with it, as EirGrid tries to do, overgrounding is the simplest solution. And we don't mind it in small cables and bringing the power to our houses and to factories and that. It's when it gets massive that we begin to get a bit iffy about it and think about it and the effect of it on all things. So the simple one is just three trenches, just insulation. Now remember, the difference between undergrounding and overgrounding is essentially the insulation. Because they're touching the earth, they need to be insulated from it, from other things, people, animals, etc. And of course there's the problem of it being hit by somebody digging or excavating. We don't really have earthquakes here, so they're not a big problem. Well, that's the direct system there that I showed you, where you just pull them through the ground and you have them highly insulated with all kinds of materials. And we'll show you that in a moment. But for high voltage cables, you need some interceptor along the way. Another system is ducting. This would be the idea of ducting. There's 4 rings there. There's 3 rings, sorry. You'd have 3 ducts. There could be concrete pipes about 14 inches in diameter, sealed, and you pull the cabling through them. And this would be the most likely type used in if they were to underground the north-south interconnector. And there has to be a vault. A vault is where you join them every so often. Roughly about 300 yards. There has to be a vault. Well, we go meters, I suppose, 300 meters. Okay, and people can get in there and the cables then can be pulled through them. So I'm just going to draw the cable here in red coming out here. And then you see they're joined here like this, spliced together. And there'd be 3 cables in the one vault, and maybe 4. There'd usually be a 4th one for communications and other things. So you can see the cable coming through there. And there'd be 3 of them. Now that's what would likely have been used in the case of the north-south interconnector. Now another system used in London is a tunnel, an actual tunnel that a man can go through. And this is the state of the art, this is the best of all. But it's not that easy putting any of these in certain terrains alongside which the north-south interconnector would run. One of the concerns I'd have about undergrounding is that we'd end up with a situation where up in the better land and the leveler country in County Meath, it'd be all put underground, and when they come into us here in Cavan, they'd forget about us and put it overground, and then we'd have a split community. Now I'm going to stop the camera now, and I don't have my zapper yet, and I'm going to come. I just want to show you something. Now you can find this on the internet, and I don't propose to read all through it. It's the undergrounding of high voltage transmission lines, technical issues, and this is by the National Grid in Britain. Now you can see some of the stuff. This will be the last word here. It's by the National Grid. So it's undergrounding high voltage transmission cable lines, the technical issues. It's called. Now I'd say you'll get that there. There are 19 pages in it. It's greeny background, and this is National Grid written here. You mightn't be able to see that, National Grid, so I think you'll get it up. So we'll go through a little bit of it here. It's a bit hard to see, and it gives the contents. Now, cable installation methods: direct buried cables, direct buried cable installation, ducted method, surface troughs, deep bore tunnels, cut and cover tunnels. And then there's cable sealing end. So they talk about the ends of the cables. When you do have them the cable, you need to seal them at the end. And you have joint bays, you have stop joints, you have water cooling, and you have reactive compensation. That there's reactive power and there's inductive power. It's technical, it's capacitance in a way, and it comes about from the fact that the voltage is ahead of the current and vice versa. It's a technical issue, but it has to be compensated for. But it occurs in overhead lines as well. Now, so you have the introduction, you have National Grid electricity transmission, and overview. Now it's well worth reading through that. I couldn't possibly get that in here at the minute. Insulating underground cables. So conductors that transmit electricity need to be electrically insulated. One major difference between overhead and underground cables is the way they are insulated. And you have this picture here showing you the various types. And bear in mind when you're reading this, the voltage. We're talking about 400,000 volts. There's no point in looking at the lesser voltage. You see there the heat dissipation can be a problem. You see there how this is put down in concrete. I think I can reasonably say, having studied this a bit, that the idea of just digging a hole in the wet clay of Monaghan and Cavan and throwing an insulated cable that's not going to work. It has to be laid down in some kind of a concrete structure with an underlying concrete structure and hard core or whatever. It's just not a matter of throwing it into the ordinary soil. It needs to be insulated from the wet by some method. That's my view of it. Now, funny enough, good information is not easy got, and there are not many underground cable, high voltage cables in the world. So then it goes into the capital cost. The cost of underground cable systems vary and have been subject to much debate. So you see, I can't be expected to solve this. In January 2012, the Institute of Engineering and Technology and Parsons Brinckerhoff published the findings of an independent study into the costs of new electricity transmission infrastructure. The report analysed the costs of installing and maintaining new high voltage transmission circuits under the ground and under the sea and overhead. So the report found that excluding building costs, the cost of operation, maintenance and energy losses over the life of the connection was broadly the same for underground and overhead lines. However, the report also concluded that the capital building costs on their own vary greatly depending on the terrain, route length and power capacity. A copy now, so it's there to be read. I think it's fair to say, however, when we look at some of the stuff that I intend to show you, that this terrain here in Meath, Cavan and Monaghan in Ireland it's not as bad as mountain. I mean, you can traverse it. It's not hilly or that, but it's there's a lot of water flowing around the place. Underground cable technology. So here we have a few of the ones. There are a limited number of cable manufacturers. Yeah, there's not many people actually manufacturing the cable. So there's XLPE cable, cross-linked polyethylene excluded, 33 kV to 400 kV. So that's one type. Then there's FFC, fluid filled cables. Same 33 kV to 400 kV, so we could use that. And there's PPL and FFC, paper polyurethane laminated, 275 kV to 400 kV. Again, suit us here. Mild mass impregnate non-drainage up to 33 kV doesn't suit us. And GIL, gas insulated lines. Now, so it goes on then to show it there, and underground cable technology is continued, and it deals with a lot of it. Now, here is a gas system where you have piping in a tunnel and gas insulates them. I don't know how they're insulated, how the cables are kept away from the sides of the tunnel, but that's obviously a very, very expensive and elaborate job there. And the planning and environmental issues of underground cables. So they're not without their environmental costs, and I have pushed this at meetings and with EirGrid and with the various bodies and with people and talking about it. If you look here, if this is to be taken right, I mean, there's a huge wide sward needed. This is it here, and I'll just read this wee bit. The use of underground cables has a long-term positive visual impact when compared to the use of overhead lines, and in some instances this will be preferred choice. However, undergrounding has other impacts that should be considered, such as environmental, socio-economic factors. It is not without an environmental cost by any manner or means. There's no doubt about that, and you can see here what we could be looking at here if we were to do that in Cavan and Monaghan. You're stripping back an area there. Well, it's the most of 35 yards in my view there, 35 metres. So The volume of spoil excavated from undergrounding cables, where 2 cables per phase are installed, is some 14 times more than the equivalent overhead line. Vegetation has to be cleared along the trenches. Now, one thing which I haven't ascertained so far, do you put in a duplicate system like the overhead line? It would seem from that's what they do. They put in a double system. I don't know. I won't go into that here because I'm not just too sure. Land use restrictions. So there's a restriction on the land use. I think that we can say that the people of Meath, Cavan and Monaghan would not mind maybe not being able to use heavy machinery or that. I think they would. Operation, maintenance, refurbishment and upgrading. So cables have an asset life of around 60 years. Now that's from the National Grid in Britain. That's 60 years. I read in America they classify them as 25 years. But this still means they have an asset life of 60 years. During their lifetime, regular inspection and testing is carried out to ensure that the cable insulation and joints are operating correctly. So there'll be a bit of work with that. If a fault occurs on a 400 kV underground cable, it is on average out of service for a period of 25 times longer than the equivalent 400 kV overhead line. This is due principally to the long time taken to locate, excavate and undertake technically involved repairs. These maintenance and repairs also cost significantly more. So that's a big problem there. The majority of faults on cables are caused by fluid leaks, faulty joints and accessories, sheet faults, water cooling failures, and most commonly third-party damage. Well, I don't think there'd be any third-party damage with this. Everyone would know where it was. I can't see that happening, so I think that wouldn't be a problem. Under fault conditions, between 2 and 6 weeks can be required to locate a fault. So that's under fault, yeah. So it can take 2 to 6 weeks to locate a fault or a leak and cable and repair the cable. During this period, excavations may be required, which can result in road closures and traffic management issues. In some cases, the excavations could be in the order of 4 meters by 30 meters. Underground cables are generally matched to the rating of the overhead line route in which they are installed. This also determines the cable design and the necessary cooling. Now, one of the things to remember is that in some cases they cool them by putting a pipe alongside them, a metal pipe alongside the cable, and this absorbs the heat. So we see other that you can read that yourself because I have to be very conscious of time. And there's a direct buried cable insulation in a rural area there. It looks to be a very dry area, and there's a good diagram there showing you how it's done. There's a 400 kV double circuit, and that's our line here. So well worth reading that, folks, if you can get at it and read it. Cable insulation methods continued. There's it along a canal, cables installed, surface troughs along a canal, and this is the one here. This is the one I mentioned where you have the big tube. It's like a train for a tube, and you see the cables along here, and a person can walk through that. Well, that's state of the art, and then there's a building every so often to get into it. That wouldn't really, I don't think, be feasible for the North-South Interconnector due to cost. Cable installation methods continued, and it goes on there to show you the different methods there. Here is an actual tunnel being put in. It's a box shape, and that would be another way of working. How that would work with water and water seepage if it's below ground is another day's work. And this here deals with where you have to connect the underground cable to an overhead line. That's if you have underground and overground in the one place. And you can read on that there in all that, and that's basically it. Just to show you here, this here is cable pulling, and that video you'll get it, high voltage cable pulling. It's not that good. It looks to be somewhere around Mexico or somewhere, but it's not that good, but it gives you a little idea of what's involved in pulling these very heavy cables. Remember, overhead lines can be an inch in diameter at the most, whereas underground lines have to have a whole lot of insulation, and there have to be several times more metal in the cable itself to avoid heat. It has to have much more ability to carry the current, because you can't, the heavier the cable is and the bigger and the wider and the more conductive material metal in it, the more it will carry the current efficiently without losing too much heat. This one here, now this one here is Nex. You can get it. It's Nexon. It's liaison. It's hard to. It shows it here, but Nexon. So if you search under nexins.uk and go for underground cabling, you should find it there. And again, a lot of stuff in it, a lot of reading there, and I won't go into it now. And it shows you different techniques. And there's the cavern there for it, where you can put it in like this. And here's the different types, and it shows you all these. Now I'm now on 20 minutes, so I'm caught for time, so just let me pause a minute. Now that's just a rough idea of what happens, and we see that it can be undergrounded. One of the things is a bit ambiguous. There isn't much of this, and I suppose we're looking at it from the point of view, if they'd undergrounded our one in the north-south interconnector, they'd have to underground them all over the country, and they intend putting up a lot more of these. However, it would have kept most people happy, and I, for one, who took a judicial review on the pylons, would have to accept it. I mean, if my neighbours and everyone were happy with it, I would have to accept that. I wouldn't go against my community. But I will say this. When the Rara wind farm was being proposed and was going through planning and everything, there were only a few of us, maybe about 5 of us, who strongly opposed it and who rigidly tried to stop it. The majority of the people in our community thought we were a little bit over the top. They said that Asher, it'll not be anything, it's only a few windmills and all that. And when they went up in 2019, this year, everything changed. Most people in the neighbourhood came to me and said, we were wrong. They put their hands up. You were right all the time. Because they didn't comprehend the impact on the environment these were until they saw them. A lot of people are not in a position to judge from a drawing or a map what actually is going to happen. And all I'm saying, and a lot of environmental campaigners say this, there is an environmental cost to undergrounding. It is not a simple matter at all. And it's certainly not a simple matter around in Cavan here, where we have rivers, we have what we call bogs, which are marshes. They're the remnants of the Ice Age. I have them in other videos there, where there's a lot of water coming through the ground. There's areas within a mile of me here where there comes wells that would supply, a big town would probably supply most of Dublin if they was used correctly. There's a lot of water around in the area of the north-south interconnector, and so these are complications. And I would have, as I say again, I would have feared we'd end up with a system of overgrounding in Monaghan and Cavan, and maybe Armagh, and maybe undergrounding in Armagh where it's drier, and Meath, and then you'd have a sort of a segregation or an apartheid system operating, and I would not like to see that. It's my view that you do it properly, you do the proper, comply with the law on assessing all this and the need for it. Other people didn't see that. So look, I haven't answered everything, folks. You can underground the cables, certainly. There are difficulties which will only come up as you do it. I think myself that the concrete ducting in a row, well apart, they'd have to be maybe several metres apart, sealed fairly well, and the cable then being good insulated cable pulled through that, would be a bit expensive, all right. You'd have to have a vault the size of a bedroom, size of a large bedroom, or even a large living room, every 300 metres, and you'd have to be able to get into that. You could even have a problem with vermin, rats and all that, but that's what I think would have been the most likely one in this area. The cable has to be extremely heavy, has to be thick, like it has to be thick itself, and the outside layers and all the stuff has to be bigger than the overhead line. But it was doable if they wanted, and if they used a minimalist approach, in other words, only put pylons and put interconnectors where they're absolutely needed, then it would probably work. That's not what EirGrid wants. They want massive hedgehog made out of the country with windmills and pylons. So that's the best I can do. I hope I help you a bit. But folks, if you look at what I'm after showing you there, that national grid, and get it on your laptop and just get a cup of coffee and read through it there. And if there are problems, get on to me and I'll answer them. One of the things people ask is about this thing about reactive power. It's to do with the fact that in alternating power, the voltage comes first and the current comes after, and there's a thing called a power factor, but it can be compensated for, and it's not that big of a deal. So right, cost, some say 5 times as expensive, sometimes some say less, and then there's the problem with maintenance and all of that over the lifetime of the project. I think the thing I learned mostly there from that was that 60 years, and that'd make a sense, 60, that makes sense, would be the asset value. So after 60 years, some replacement would be needed. But I would imagine if you install concrete ducting, it'd do forever. Good concrete ducting, the right sort of stuff, would do forever, and you'd only have to pull the cables in and out of it later. One of the problems I see also is it means a lot to have the duplicate lines on the pylons. One each side, 1, 2, 3 each side. So you can take off one side and work away, leaving the other. Where you can't do that with undergrounding. I have to say, in my own view, to be fair to everybody, I think that is one great plus of the overhead line, that if you're to put that underground, you'd nearly want a duplicate system. You'd have 6 cables running along. You'd have an extremely wide corridor and be very, very hard to work that at roads and everything. People talk about directional drilling and all this stuff. I'm not so sure with this type of line can you use directional drilling. You do not want these heavy high tension lines mixing with water out of the drains coming down the road. I don't think it's on, and that's my own personal view. Now, having said that, folks, I'm dealing with something which is a wee bit out of my depth, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. The best way to look at it is it is more expensive, and I think in my community, in my here, you'd see them put overground in some places, particularly where there are very wet areas and boggy areas and things like that. You'd see a mix. And you can do that. There's a way of doing that. There's a sealed end, as to say, you can do that too. It isn't a problem either. It's a question of the will and a question of the cost. And that cost is all down to the minimalist approach. You only interfere, you only do damage where you absolutely have to. And because we have a mad rush for green renewable energy and producing electricity and an absolute obsession with it, we have this awful problem that the minimalist approach is not allowed. It's all go the whole hog, and the environment means nothing. I'm long enough on here. I hope that's some use to you, and I'll let you go. Thank you very much for that, and I hope you got something out of it, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.